I would like to yield a minute to Mr. Holt of New Jersey.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentlelady. You heard from Representative McCollum the dimensions of this, how close it is to an existing large bridge, why this is really a boondoggle. I wanted to talk about how this fits in the national picture of wild and scenic rivers. This bill would, for the first time, waive the requirements of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, a law that has protected the lower St. Croix for nearly 30 years, protects 12,000 miles of rivers in 38 states and Puerto Rico, including the Delaware River in my home state of New Jersey. These are special rivers designated under the Wild and Scenic Rivers Law. When the Resources Committee marked up the legislation before us now, I offered a simple amendment. My amendment would have ensured that any bridge authorized under this bill be designed and located in a way to minimize the direct and inverse environmental effect. It was defeated. This is really a bridge too far. It's far too large. It is just, far too expensive. And should Congress pass this bill and waive the wild and scenic river protection, it's hard to imagine any future bridge project that won't receive a waiver like this issued by Congress.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I yield 2 minutes to our colleague from the state of Utah, Representative Rod Bishop.
The gentleman from Utah is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 1972, the Wild and Scenic River Act was used on this part of the river, even though there was already an existing bridge on that river. Now, the safety of that bridge is creating problems for people, and the traffic buildup is creating problems for people. And actually, the National Park Service already had met with everybody, found a way to build a new bridge, mitigate the adverse circumstances, and an agreement was reached until outside groups who came in here with this dogmatic reverence for the Wild and Scenic River Act basically took it to court, threw everything away, and we have now exacerbated the problem. Wild and Scenic River, on a clear day, if indeed the traffic does not produce enough smog that has backed up because trying to get across this river, you can actually see a marina, the smokestacks of a power plant that is in the neighborhood of a sewage treatment plant, and maybe even the orange jumpsuits of the county jail that is in this area. We are abusing the law to stop this progress that stops this bridge that is needed desperately for safety reasons and for traffic reasons in this particular area. There is a reason this by unanimous consent in the Senate. It solves a problem. It's common sense. It's the right thing to do. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized.
Thank you. I don't think my constituents consider me an outside group. With that, I would yield 1 minute to Mr. Grijalva of Arizona.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to the legislation. This bill is too controversial and should not be on the suspension calendar. Last year, the majority held a hearing on the issue in the Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands. The Park Service testified against the bill. It was also opposed by a range of national organizations, from fiscal conservatives, tax watchdogs, organization, and environmental conservationists. This bill has already been stated would create the first ever exemption to the Wild and Scenic River Act for construction of a bridge in a protected river. This has never been done, and the question is, why now? This precedent for a $700 million mega bridge that threatens all 203 protected rivers in 38 states should not be allowed to proceed. And it very much violates the no earmark pledge of the Republican majority. Congresswoman McCollum and Congressman Ellison introduced a better bill, H.R. 3434, that removes congressional mandate found in this bill that is under consideration and sets a spending cap to protect taxpayers. I understand the need to create jobs. I understand the need to fix our falling infrastructure. There are over 2,000 bridges in Minnesota and Wisconsin that need immediate, dire attention. That would create jobs, and it would move the infrastructure needs of this country in a very, very direct way and in a very needed way. This is a waste of taxpayers' money and a violation of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this bill has bipartisan support, and other things being equal, I think we tend to listen to the representative in whose district a project would exist. This district is in the district of my colleague Ron Kine from the state of Minnesota, and at this time I would be happy to yield him 4 minutes.
How much?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the gentleman for yielding me this time. Mr. Speaker, this bridge is in my congressional district. I have been living and breathing this issue for the last 16 years. Mr. Speaker, it's time to build a bridge. This is a bipartisan bill. It passed the Senate under unanimous consent, and this legislation before us today merely exempts this river under the Wild and Scenic River Act, exempts this bridge so that the states of Wisconsin and Minnesota can move forward on this vital infrastructure project. This is what we have today, Mr. Speaker. It's an 82-year-old lift bridge that's on its last leg. Last summer, the drawbridge was up for 10 days, prohibiting traffic from crossing because of high water. Every summer, every time a boat travels underneath this bridge, the lift bridge is lifted, and we have a traffic jam miles long waiting for the bridge to open up again. Those cars and trucks are spewing fumes, dropping oil. It is a major environmental problem, not to mention the safety concern that we have with this old lift bridge. It's on its final leg, and there's consensus that we have to build a new bridge. This is what's recommended by the states of Wisconsin and Minnesota. This is what the new bridge would look like. And yes, you will see right next to it is a coal-burning power plant on this so-called part of the Wild and Scenic River. There's very little wild or scenic at this location, and that's exactly why it's being sited at this location, along with major manufacturing plants. This is another view of the bridge in relationship to the power plant just south of the Stillwater area. And this is actually the view from downtown Stillwater looking south along the river at this bridge. You can barely see it because of how it's designed to blend into the atmosphere. And Mr. Speaker, about 6 years ago, I formed a process called Resolve to get all the stakeholders at the table so that they could discuss and scrub every option and every alternative that was available. At the end of that 5-year negotiating process, 26 of the 27 stakeholders reached an agreement on what needed to be done. The only holdout was the Sierra Club, and that's why we're having this big debate this evening. But even their proposal that came in at the 11th hour would cost just as much. It would take another 10 years to build, and it would actually cut into the bluff on the Minnesota side, causing more environmental damage. Even the local and regional offices of the National Park Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service had signed off on this bridge project. I believe, as do most of the members of the Wisconsin and Minnesota delegation, as well as all 4 of the U.S. senators, that it's time to build this bridge. Both governors in Wisconsin and Minnesota want to build this bridge. The Department of Transportation in both Wisconsin and Minnesota want to build this bridge. 92% of the residents in Wisconsin want to see this bridge go forward. 88% of the residents in Minnesota, in Representative Bachmann's district, where the bridge is also built, wants this bridge to go forward. It is time to build this bridge. And every option, every alternative has been considered. And this is where we keep coming back to time and time again. They looked at the cost, they looked at the design, they looked at the location, they looked at the environmental impact, they looked at the mitigation to be done. And 26 of the 27 stakeholders reached this conclusion. And it's unfortunate that the Wild and Scenic River Act is being used to bludgeon a major infrastructure project that will create jobs in this region when we need them the most. Not only the short-term jobs in building this bridge, but the long-term economic development and the explosion of economic growth and job creation that will result from the creation of this bridge. Heading south, as my colleague from Minnesota had suggested, to hook up to the interstate highway was not a viable option. We have the town of Hudson that lies in between. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent for 2 additional minutes.
If we could have 2 additional minutes on our side, I have no objection.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What this bridge that's being proposed considers is not only current traffic flow projections, but future traffic flow projections over the next 20 or 30 years. I know infrastructure projects can be difficult. I know they can be contentious. But when so many people at the federal, state, and local level, the agencies, as well as private entities, have been at the table for 5 years negotiating and trying to reach agreement on what bridge is necessary, when they do finally reach an agreement, that tells me it's time to build a bridge. Now, I want to thank the ranking member and the chair of the Transportation Committee for your support, as well as the chairs of the subcommittee and the ranking on the subcommittee for your support. Transportation Secretary LaHood has been strongly in favor of moving this project forward. And I also want to thank the administrations, the governors of both Wisconsin and Minnesota, for their interest and their support for this project. One of the reasons it's being brought up is because Governor Dayton from Minnesota says that life is short and they need predictability and certainty on what projects are moving forward. He's been a strong advocate of this bridge, but we can't be delaying this and dragging this out for another 16 years, which is the likely outcome if the opposition figures out a way to bring this bill down. Enough is enough. We have explored this, we have exhausted it, and we keep coming back to the same place as before, this bridge, which makes this legislation necessary, and I encourage my colleagues to support it so we all can move on with our lives. I thank you, and I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair wishes to clarify that each side now has an additional 2 minutes. The gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized.
Thank you. Could you please tell me how many minutes I have besides the 2?
The gentlelady from Minnesota has 6 minutes remaining.
Okay, 6 minutes, and could I ask how much my friend from Wisconsin, Mr. Petri, has?
The gentleman from Wisconsin has 10.5 minutes.
Thank you. As I said in the beginning of this debate, this is a bad bill. Excuse me. I would like to yield myself 2 minutes, please.
The gentlelady is recognized.
As I said at the beginning of this bill, SR 34 is a bad bill, and it reflects our irresponsible fiscal, bad transportation policy, and bad environmental policy. The way the law has been structured into making this moment happen specified only one type of bridge could be built, and it had to be a bridge that went 65 miles an hour. And then the legislation before us today takes it even farther, and for the first time puts in that a bridge that is going to be a replacement bridge in the Wild and Scenic River must be an extradose bridge. It mandates the size and the scope of the bridge. Ladies and gentlemen, we just could have had a piece of legislation that would have allowed an exemption without the specification that was added in this legislation. I could have stood here and supported it, but I cannot support a $700 million interstate bridge when there's one 6 miles away. The Stillwater Bridge needs to be replaced. But it won't be replaced, actually, because it's going to be, the historic lift bridge is going to be used as a bike and pedestrian bridge, which in perpetuity, the states of Wisconsin and Minnesota will have to maintain and repair, and will continue during the summer to be raised and lifted as boats go through. And with that, I reserve the remainder of my time.
Reserves. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
I yield 5 minutes to my colleague from the state of Wisconsin, Representative Sean Duffy.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I appreciate the gentleman from Wisconsin yielding. I think it's important that we're clear about what this bill truly does. This bill exclusively deems the St. Croix River consistent with the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. That's all it does. It's deeming it consistent. There is no appropriations aspect. There's no budgetary authority. All we're doing is deeming this bridge consistent with the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. You know, today is a pretty special day. It's a special day because it's Leap Day. It's February 29th. It comes around only once every 4 years. And I've only been in this House for a year and a couple months. But I got to tell you what, bipartisanship doesn't come around that often. But it is here tonight on the House floor. Bipartisanship, this is what I mean by that. You have two governors, a Republican and a Democrat, who support this bill. You have senators from Wisconsin and Minnesota, all four of them, Republicans and Democrats, supporting this bill. You have progressives and conservatives in this chamber who've all come out and supported this bill. You have Vikings and Packers supporting this bill. This is a remarkable day. Listen, we go so far, you have the AFL-CIO and local chambers together supporting this bill. This is remarkable. We haven't seen this kind of bipartisanship in the 15 months that I've been here. This is a great bill. This gets the job done because people are doing what their constituents ask them to do, which is work together. It makes sense. This is working across party lines for a very important reason. It's because we all in this region understand the importance of bridges and what happens when something goes wrong. We all remember I-35 between Minneapolis and St. Paul that had a sufficiency rating of 50 out of 100. And a few years ago, we remember that bridge collapsed. We remember seeing the devastation of that bridge when it collapsed. But a rating of 50 out of 100. The bridge we're talking about today, the one that used across the St. Croix River, has a rating of 32 out of 100. It is less safe than I-35 was when it collapsed. And again, it was built in 1931. It's 82 years old. Listen, the people in this region, they need the bridge. They want the bridge. Everybody's working together. I want to make sure we're clear about the people that use this. I know the gentlelady from Minnesota says it's only serving a small community in Holton, Wisconsin, a community of 386 people. You got to explain to me then how 18,000 people go across that bridge every day. You are dealing with the largest growing county in Wisconsin and the 13th largest metropolitan area in the country. That's what this bridge connects. People use it. This is a bedroom county. They work in St. Croix County over in Minneapolis, St. Paul. They use that bridge to get back and forth to work. 18,000 people a day use this bridge. This is no small feat. We're talking about the funding component, saying it's $700 million. I think we got to be clear on what that $700 million is. It's really only $292 million when we look at the actual cost of construction of the bridge. $292 million. If you want to look at the extra costs that get you upwards of $600 million, that cost comes from all the mitigation, the environmental mitigation work that's been requested over the decades of negotiation trying to get this bridge done. It's not the bridge cost, it's the bipartisan effort trying to get people to agree to make this project go forward that increases the cost so dramatically to $600+ million. And so I think it's important. Get this, this is a shovel-ready project. Shovel-ready. We hear it's going to create 6,000 new jobs over the course of 3 years. And it's far from rushed. We have talked about this, again, for decades. And I think when people would say it is a bad bill or a controversial bill, it's important to note Republican and Democrat senators, governors, congressmen, communities have rallied around this project. Let's get it done. Let's finally build the St. Croix River Bridge. I yield back.
Time has expired. The gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to state for the record that I have 7 bridges in my congressional district with hundreds of thousands of car trips a day.